The borders of space and time have opened once again, and transmitting from the mountains of West Virginia, it's time once again for Let's Find Out with Diego. The universe is waiting for you.
All systems go.
On this episode of Let's Find Out, our guest is an author and paranormal investigator that has captivated audiences on her paranormal talk show, Stories of the Supernatural, and the podcast Nightshade Diary and Supernatural Storytime. She has appeared in Season 1, Episode 1 of Paranormal Survivor and Season 1, Episode 12 of Haunted Hospitals, which can be seen on Destination America, Netflix, and the Trvl Channel. All this plus more. Please welcome first-time guest, author, narrator, and producer, MP Pellicer, Marlene, my friend. Welcome to Let's Find Out. I'm so happy to have you on this evening.
Hi, how are you doing, Diego? It's great to speak to you again.
Oh, I'm doing well, and like I said, I'm really happy to have you on. And first, I'm gonna start off the show with thanking you for having me on your show a couple of months ago.
It was great. It was a great show. I really loved it.
Oh, thank you. And honestly, I'm a much better host than guest, and I kind of know how it feels on the other end. And I appreciate you having me, getting me through the whole interview, because actually I was like, because I know you do kind of do long form, like how am I gonna? And then you made it so easy. I felt very comfortable with you from the start, so I really appreciate that.
Fantastic. So anyway, now that I'm at the other end of this equation, now you can go ahead and if I put you in an uncomfortable spot, you can return the favor.
Oh, no, and I appreciate that. No, we're going to have a great time tonight, trust me.
Okay.
And as I'm looking at your bio, and then I went on Amazon, and you have, what is it, about 9 books now? Or?
Yeah, I'm working. It's like 8 or 9, and I'm working on one, and we were talking about it quickly. I'm trying to finish this one, which is the longest it's taken me to talk about procrastination. It's taken me about 3 years. I was producing about 2 books a year, and this last one, it's over 300 pages, but it's like taken me forever. Yes. So there we go. Right from writer to writer, since we were talking about that too, that writing is hard work sometimes.
It is. For me, and I've only written one, a very short book as a first-time writer, and I tell some of my author friends that it sat on my hard drive for 2 months before I even sent it to my publisher, because it was probably one of the more, it sounds silly, but it's one of the more scariest things I've experienced. And then once it was released, then when I got the box at home and opened the books, I'm like, oh, it's for real now. So,
yeah.
But, and I'm quickly working on my second one, but that's not about me. So we're going to talk about you, of course, my friend. And as I'm looking at the bio, talking about the books, you've been active in the paranormal for a very long time. And I would probably take a guess that long before you were an investigator, a producer, podcaster, and author, perhaps there's something in your life that brought you on this journey. Did you have experiences early in life? Was there a family history of this?
Believe it or not, no. Okay, how's this? I had a family which was like, nah, ghosts aren't real. What is that? That's, that was brought up that way, and however, when I was like 16 years old, me and my mom, we moved into a rental house that was right across the street from my grandmother, because everybody stays close to the matriarch of the family. And I remember this was the story. My mom would leave to go to work before I did, and she always told me, for any reason you decide to stay home, you need to let your grandmother know, because of course my grandmother was home all day long. I said, sure. One time, I was one of those things. I didn't feel like going to school. Stupid stuff. I'm thinking, oh, I'm in bed. And by the way, I knew I was fully awake. This is one of those things that when it happens, you don't think of it being supernatural. It's only after the fact. So all of a sudden, the kitchen was towards the front of the house, and I was in the back bedroom. And I hear somebody, like, when somebody's opening drawers and cupboards.
Yeah.
And this was an older house, and the cabinets and stuff. Like, when people rattle, like, the utensils and stuff. And I'm coming out, and I was perfectly awake. And I'm like, what's my grandmother doing in the house? By the way, she had a key to the house. But no, she would never have come over. Because, first of all, we didn't have anything she needed. Plus, she had arthritis in her legs, and she would have to cross the street. But that's the first thing that came to my mind. Of course, because you're hearing somebody going through your kitchen. It's like, what's my grandmother doing here, right? And all of a sudden, when you have a house with a raised wooden floors that you can hear somebody walking.
Yes.
I hear somebody come walking down the hallway. Like I said, I'm at the end of the hallway. And I'm thinking, oh man, my grandmother's going to grill me. Why did I didn't go to school? So I do one of those, like, I just like turned over, like away from the doorway. And I felt like somebody, remember, I'm assuming this is my grandmother, come to the entry of the doorway and stand there. Now, it's hard to explain because obviously I'm not seeing it. First of all, my grandmother was a short lady, but for some reason I felt one of those things that at the moment that whoever was at the door was tall. But it was weird. It's a weird, like, but it's like, okay, I'll just pretend. And then if she asks me, I'll tell her, oh, I don't feel good. Things that you do when you're 15 and 16 years old. And I feel somebody come. I had like the blankets like at my waist. Somebody come and pull the cover over my shoulder. And, I was like, okay, I guess she thought I was asleep. Okay, fast forward the whole day. I goofed off at home. My mom would come home from work and after she dropped off, she would immediately cross the street to go and drink some coffee with my grandmother. 5 minutes later, the phone rings. My mom, why didn't you tell your grandmother you had stayed home from school? I was like, what are you talking about? She was here this morning. She knows I was here. And I hear my grandmother in the background because my mom is telling her, she's like, well, she's a liar. She's a liar. I didn't go. What is she talking about? My grandmother swore up and down. She had not gone. Which, by the way, she would never have lied about it. And to be honest with you, knowing my grandmother would not have left either without waking me up or tapping on the shoulder and going, why didn't you go to school? You know what I'm saying? And I was like, what in the world? And my grandmother swore up and down. Now, around that time, this was going into the summer. This was like towards the end of the summer. I had a guy I was talking to. He was a busboy. So we would be talking like late at night. And you remember when people used to have long cords that you would just stretch out?
Yes.
I would sit in the hallway talking. And of course it was late because he wouldn't get work, done from work till late at night. He was a busboy, right? And we had the jealousy windows. Remember, this is Florida, and a couple of times I would hear, one time I heard like the chain link fence, the gate rattle. Because it's quiet, it's late, it's like 1 a.m., and it was on a weekend because they wouldn't let me talk, contrary to, and I was like, that's a cat. Man, that's rattling a lot for it to be a cat. And then a couple of times, which, by the way, I heard somebody walking on the grass around the house, so much so that I told this guy, there's somebody outside. And he's like, hey, and I'm like, and I jump into bed and I wake up my mom, there's somebody outside, there's somebody outside. My poor mom, my poor mother, she wakes up and we're here turning off the lights. Well, the only light, as a matter of fact, that was on was a hallway light. We're going from bedroom window to bedroom window looking. Like, first of all, we don't hear anybody run off. That's number one. Number two, I grew up in this neighborhood. I was in this neighborhood all my life. We knew all the neighbors. Okay. Number three, there were no trees in that yard. It was bare. I mean, it had like one pine tree in the front, but there was nothing where you could say somebody went behind the shrubbery. Nothing. There was an alleyway that ran through the back. Okay. That happened to me like twice where I woke up my mom. That's how much I heard somebody walking in the yard. Believe it or not, even then, I didn't catch on Diego that what was going on was paranormal. Later on is when I start thinking about this. Okay. How weird it was that I kept hearing that inside the house. And then the walking around the house and then the rattling of the gate, which, by the way, was all original to the house. These houses were built like in the late 40s. Later on, because like I said, I grew up in that neighborhood and I knew the family that had lived there had been a couple with a daughter. The daughter had grown up, left, and the husband passed away. And the lady, she rented the house out to us, but she moved away. She was by herself, right? I'm thinking, without knowing, but I'm almost positive, because they had lived there for years, that this was the husband. He was an older man, because like I said, that's the only thing I can think of. Okay, and that was my first, besides reading Hans Holzer books, back to your original question, that was my first introduction into having a paranormal experience. And I didn't realize what it was at the time because, of course, I was 15 or 16. And when you're a teenager, that's the last thing on your mind. You're thinking of other things, So, yeah, and like I said, and then around that time, one time, like maybe a week after that thing that I heard, that rattling in the kitchen, which later on I found out a lot of people have that experience that they'll hear stuff somebody going around their kitchen or the part. All of a sudden, the phone rings at 3 a.m. This was around the time we only had two phones, one in the bedroom, one in the kitchen. My mom, you get a call at 3 a.m. and you're thinking, oh,
Yeah.
something's. It's my grandmother. She has. I was one of those things. I was a mama's girl. Even though I had my own bedroom that night, it just so happened I was sleeping with my mom. And I hear my grandmother saying, "Where's Marlene?" And my mother's like, "She's right next to me. What are you talking about?" She goes, "I heard her. I could swear because I would go and knock on their door a certain way and call them." She goes, "Somebody just knocked on the door with her voice and calling for me." And I'm hearing my mom telling her, "No, she's here. She's been here. I'm asleep next to me." What that was about, I have no idea. That was a weird one-off. But anyway, yes, that was my intro to weirdness. How's that?
That was a great introduction. And once you started talking about the part where a something mimicked your voice, I've had a similar experience here in my home with my wife, and I had that in my book. I think we talked about it on your show a couple of months ago. Did it happen again? Do you have any more experiences with a ghost mimicking the voice of either yourself, your mother, your grandmother, or?
No. But you know what? We didn't stay there that long because my mom got another house. She got a better deal, and we didn't stay there long. But like I said, uh, when you grow up in the neighborhood and everybody knows you and you know everybody, and it just so happened that we knew a little bit of the history of the house. Which, by the way, there was, how you always think of haunted or ghost, oh, something tragic happened in the house. No, nothing tragic ever happened in that house. All right. So it was, later on that I started thinking about, but no, as far as the mimicking stuff, which I find is kind of like, and of course that it went to my grandmother's house. That was like weird. That was really unusual. That was very unusual, but no, not again. But that sounds intelligent. How's this? Knowing what I know about the paranormal, when you have mimicking, that's not a residual haunting. You're talking there an intelligent haunting. But I
So
didn't know that then.
well, let's go in. Let's get into the intelligent haunting, because I think that, at least for me, that's the first time I've heard it described that way. Intelligent
Hmm.
haunting. Are we talking about? Let me see if I can phrase this question correctly. Are we talking a human spirit or something
Oh,
otherworldly? That,
human or non-human, it could be a residual. Usually is like a timestamp. You'll have, and this usually happens after a lot of repetition. I've had people that will tell me, "Hey, at a certain time of the day, let's say in the morning, I will smell coffee, like day after day at the same time, a smell of coffee or bread baking, or even sometimes I'll hear, let's say on the stairs, a s- coming and going, and then it goes, but there's nothing there, and it's almost like something that happens so many times that it goes into the fabric of the place." All right. But there's no intelligence, no spirit, no soul, if you want to call it that. But then the intelligent ones, you could be human or you could be non-human. All right. You do have intelligent hauntings where, let's say we'll go with, this doesn't happen with non-humans. With humans, that they're stuck like on a hamster wheel. They're going through their life, what they're doing almost parallel to yours. All right. And they're almost unaware of the humans that are there. In other words, that's why you'll have sometimes certain parts of the house or certain things that will occur almost like on a time clock. Like that person is on a schedule and they're living, even after they died, what they would do as a norm during the day. That's why you have people that will say, "Hey, the kitchen is the hot spot." I've heard other people say, "You know what, especially like in sometimes in farming communities, sundown, like when people come in, contrary to what people think, it's not only nighttime. There would be an uptick because it's like there's the schedule of that house. And then there's the intelligent hauntings, which is they're aware of the humans that are there. All right, whether it's human or non-human. Which you can have both at the same time also. They're aware of the humans. Um, Sometimes they're scared. Sometimes they're possessive. Sometimes they don't even want to interact with humans, and others do. Uh, it all depends. I've heard of a lot of, well, I've had experience with investigations where they think it's strictly a human spirit or a ghost. We're going to call it a ghost. A ghost is something that's earthbound. And then come to find out that behind that there is a non-human entity that sometimes is what makes certain experiences malevolent. All right. It's not just the uncomfortable feeling. It gives it like a very malevolent flavor, which is what wigs people out. And I'll tell you, Diego, because I did write a book that's called Supernatural Safety, a DIY for, as far as what people do. And the reason why I did that book was people think, because they watch the reality shows that, you're going to get a team in there and they're going to come and they're going to identify whoever is causing it. First, they're going to say, yes, it is. And this is who it is. And this is what we're going to do. Even if it's like we have to call in an exorcism team, people think, poof, it's gone. No, sorry, it doesn't work that way. First of all, usually the owners, whether it's technically yours or a rental, if this is your place, you have got to keep working at this afterwards. And people, I've noticed, give up their power too easily. Like you got to fight for your space. And, to be perfectly honest, what I've seen is a lot of people, their solution is, I'm moving.
All right.
I'm moving. And I have had cases where people would call us in because one time they didn't want whatever was there to follow them. They were moving out of the state and they were so worried that whatever was there was going to follow them that they called us up and they said, look, we want to make sure that we just don't want this thing to go with us, you know? And that happens. And it doesn't have to be something like really like heavy duty, but enough that people are uncomfortable having that around them. Like they know, like the living and I know there's people out there that are going to say, no, Marlene, I'm sorry. I've had enough experience with this. Living with a non-living, eventually it goes bad. Like a relationship, it's beautiful or it's great, but eventually it goes south. Guaranteed. Guaranteed. Plus, why would you want to trap a human spirit or a human soul on this level if it's supposed to be in the presence of the divine, off the earth plane? Yeah. And it always, because basically what you have is a human, here we're talking again, a human soul that's frustrated. You know what happens when humans get frustrated? They become bitter, they become difficult, they become obnoxious, and sometimes even vengeful. They do bad things because they're just mad. So yeah, it always ends up going south. So I mean, I've had a lot of different, I don't know, ask me what you want as far as, cases or anything, and I'll tell you that. And sometimes you just have bad people, bad people that were bad when they were alive, and that when they die, they're just SOBs. It's not that they're a demon or non-human. It's just that they're just bad people, even when they're dead.
Yeah, but it's my understanding that, and I know people like to throw that word demon a lot,
Oh God, yeah.
and the percentage of that is very low. It's
Yeah.
my understanding.
Plus you also have elementals, you have elemental spirits. I mean, I've even, when I did hypnotherapy and I worked with spirit attachments, which can go into your aura. You can have attachments from dead people. You can even have attachments, here we go, from ETs. Okay, a lot of people think, what? Yes, you can have an invasion of your aura from an extraterrestrial. And hypnotists, even psychiatrists, have run across it without looking for it. They didn't expect it. How's that? And from there, we could, and I'm sure you've heard of some people saying, are ETs demonic or vice versa? Are demons ETs? Who
Yeah,
comes first, the chicken or the egg? But yes,
and it depends on who you ask too, because it depends on
yes.
your belief system. One will call it an evil spirit. One will call him a
Hmm.
messenger. Now, I'm glad you went into the extraterrestrial realm because that's kind of sometimes the last thing people think about when it comes to paranormal
Hmm.
or supernatural. But a lot of these things, they kind of they cross roads sometimes,
Yeah,
and maybe an extraterrestrial experience can be misidentified as a paranormal experience.
sure.
Have
Uh,
you had any extraterrestrial experiences yourself?
no, I have not. But I will tell you what, and I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with Skinwalker Ranch, and there was, before it came into being, the recent, it was owned by Mr. Bigelow, and he had people out there for a long time. And one of the scientists that was out there, Cone Keller, I hope I'm pronouncing his name, along with George Knapp, wrote a book. I think it was Hunt for the Skinwalker, something like that. But anyway, they described where they were out there strictly for UFO research, and they ended up having what they call the hitchhiker effect, which was paranormal occurrences happening at their houses for people that left that worked there. They would go back and they pretty way out there. By the way, paranormal, even sightings of cryptid-like creatures. It was weird. Now I will tell you, I used to belong to a group that was a UFO group, and they would move on, and other people would come to presentations for us, and some of the people came to talk to me, especially when they knew I did hypnosis, and they were telling me where they had had UFO sightings, not abductions. One lady thought but we're here talking abduction, UFO sightings. Then after that, they started having paranormal occurrences in their house. And they were asking me, have you ever heard of that? And in other words, they themselves couldn't equate, like, how do these two things connect? How is it that me seeing a UFO, all of a sudden, I start having paranormal occurrences in my house, like knockings. Sometimes people had lived there already. They had never had this problem. And it would take them a while to start realizing that the jumping off point was the sighting of the UFO. By the way, some of this stuff has lasted for years, okay? Where say would see this UFO on and off, and one lady wanted me to, and wanted me to hypnotize her because she suspected that she might have been an abductee. All right. And what we never got around to it. That sometimes that, again, I'm sure you've realized before, ufologists, it's strictly UFOs and ETs, and paranormal is a separate thing. There's even been linkage to cryptid sightings with an uptick of UFO sightings. How do these all things combine, or are we talking interdimensional beings, and that's why they seem to pop up at the same time? Is there some point where these dimensional rips or veils just become thinner and everything just crosses back and forth, and that's why all of a sudden you have ETs and UFOs and cryptids and paranormal all happening at the same time? Is because maybe there's, like, the moon phase. This is just me. Maybe there's a moment where this thing that keeps dimensions separate just becomes thin or opens up or whatever. Everybody's heard of portals, but I'm talking here something that maybe there's that certain times of the year, again, or something happens, maybe a lightning strike, I don't know, allows these things, and that's why you see more of it at the same time. But yes, ET, I have not had UFO or ET sightings. Sometimes, it's like, I wish I could. And then they say, be careful what you wish for. Again, I really consider that if you take out, let's say, in the UFO sightings, we're not going with abductions. If you take out the people that are lying, the people that are crazy, the people that are mistaken, they really believe what they see it, that still leaves so many sightings that it tells you UFOs are real, is my point. You see what I'm saying? Now, whether these UFOs, then you go into extraterrestrials. How many are there? Are they friendly? Are they not friendly? I'm sure you've heard of the Greys. Are they biomechanical? Are the reptilians? Do they want to take us over? I've always heard that they're kind of like they're the bad guys kind of thing. Or are there no such thing as ETs? Can you imagine if all the UFOs are from origins are man-made? I doubt it, but I'm ready for anything. And this is something I've wondered about. Since the X-Files and everything, everybody's always had that, what do you call it? That conspiracy theory, the government knows all about the ETs and about the spaceships, and they've back engineered all this stuff, and they might even have a treaty. Everybody has but and everybody's waiting for the big disclosure, like, hey, you're going to finally tell us extraterrestrials and UFOs are real. But what if it's not that? What if they haven't told us anything because they really don't know much about them? Can you imagine they're having a big press conference, and people are going to ask, well, yes, UFOs are real, or we've been visited. How's that? Yeah, who? No, we don't know. What do you mean? Where are they from? We don't know. Uh, what are they here for? We don't know. You really want to panic people? Because in the back of our mind, I think we always have this safety net kind of idea that if the government's handling it, they're handling it. Whatever it is, even if they agree to hybridization or anything. But can you imagine a press conference where basically the government or the people in authority basically have little or no answers? Yes, we've recovered some stuff at crash sites, but we really don't understand the technology. You mean you guys haven't back engineered? Not really. Most of the stuff we developed on our own. How about well, yeah, we recovered some corpses, but again, we don't. In other words, everybody would be like, oh my God. So there's UFOs and ETs all over the place, and we're basically at their mercy? Well, yeah. So,
I think so as well. Now, being that you're in Florida, right?
yes,
And I think Florida at one point was a hot spot for UFO
yes,
sightings, and I think it
still,
was it Gulf Breeze where there was I don't know what decade it was where it was kind of active at some point, but I think talking about disclosure, the last time I heard something was going to be said related to Florida, I think Marco Rubio was about to
he
say,
was he was getting
yeah,
into it. And yeah, I know there was a point that he was like pursuing, like we need more disclosure about UFOs. And as a matter of fact, today, oh my God, Marlene, I can't remember. I was listening to something. Sometimes I'm like multitasking. They were talking about this, and they were saying that this whole thing of the UFOs and extraterrestrials that they don't even really give the full story even to the president. And I don't mean the president, I mean all presidents, because they come and go. In other words, the people that run this UFO ET programs, they're the ones that really know it. And like they don't, just because a person's the president, they don't tell them really everything that's going on. Because it's like, don't worry, because in the most 8 years, you're going to be gone, and you don't need to know this. So in other words, they think that that program is it's one of the deepest, biggest secrets that the government has. And I agree.
yeah, and as we've learned since the last few years, and this is not a political show,
Oh no, I know what you mean. It's like every
yeah,
time you do, it's like what? Yes,
where we've seen different agencies
yes,
act in interesting ways, and
yes.
they got their own set of rules. They do whatever they want to do.
Right. Yeah,
So it's not too far fetched to say that, like you said, why tell this president anything? 4 to 8 years will be gone anyway.
yeah.
So what does it
Right,
matter if they know? They don't need that knowledge, need to know kind of deal like that.
right, right. We're good,
So
and God forbid they would want to disclose on it. So yeah, they were saying that this is like one of the biggest, um, like that whoever's running this program. And you know what? Once upon a time, most people would have said, "Oh, come on, that's psh, who's gonna be able to do that? Who's gonna be able to pull that off?" And it'd be like nowadays, And then you say, okay, they need the funding. God knows they've got funding. They can get funding from anywhere. As far as how's this? Without having to explain, let's say, to any of these committees and Senate, as like because when they appropriate this money, they have to explain. But if nobody really knows you're using the money, there's no explanations to be given as far as how long, what are you doing, whatever, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I mean, I don't mean to sound sinister, but the implications were that keeping this stuff secret is like if you wanted to blab about it, you were going to be like, bye bye, all of a sudden you disappear or you
yeah,
deleted yourself, you did away with yourself kind of thing, or one of those, or you ended up committed to an insane asylum or some weird stuff. In other words, you know how you hear about the Men in Black? And a lot
yes,
of people say, well, the Men in Black, they're ETs, kind of. I think that there's a version of the Men in Black, which I'm sure you've heard about, of different people that have had experiences where they say they get visited by the Men in Black and they're told, be quiet, don't say anything. And as a matter of fact, there was a story after the crash at Roswell in 1947. There was a hospital on a base, okay, which supposedly they took the recovered remains from Roswell over there. And there was a guy who was because this is a small town, which he was like the ambulance slash funeral director of the town. You do a little bit of everything. And he talks about how they asked him to provide 3 small childlike caskets. And he was like, that's really weird. And then he said he saw something like them, like he saw some movement. And again, when you live in a small town, you know everybody and that's weird. And basically he said he saw he was on the base. He went onto the base to deliver this stuff. And I guess some military official saw him like looking, and he goes, whatever you see here, you better be quiet about it, or they're going to be finding your bones out in the desert. And you know what? People believe that, and I believe that. In other words, they're not bluffing. How's that?
No, totally true, because it might not, let's just say, let me throw on the other side of the coin here. Maybe it's not even anything remotely extraterrestrial.
Yeah.
Perhaps it's something that they themselves created, some sort of hybrid thing that escaped,
Sure.
or some sort of project that kind of leaked out a little bit, and they're trying to rein it back. And who knows? Those bodies may not have even been alien. They could have been some unfortunate guy that ran into something, and they kind of just like, sorry, pal, you know too much. You never know.
Let me tell you something. Maybe 7 years ago, 8 years ago, I was speaking to this priest about something else. And he tells me he's teaching. The conversation came up because he was doing teaching at this university that was right next to the high school I went to. I went to a Catholic high school, and this was a separate campus. And it was, and we started talking. And I said, "Oh, what do you teach at the university?" And he goes, "Oh, medical ethics." I go, "Yeah, what is that about?" And he goes, "Well, what's ethically okay to do." And I said, "But what do you mean?" So we start getting, and he's basically teaching a course on what is ethically correct when they're doing research, medical research. And I said, what do you, I'm asking, like, he goes, basically that some of these laboratories, which a lot of times they're out of the United States, they do a lot of weird stuff with animals and human hybridization. And I was looking at him like, what? And he goes, yeah. And my course is about the ethics that even if something is, you can't say, well, maybe where its lab is at, it's not against the law, but ethically, medically, you shouldn't do that. That was what his course was. And I was like, what? I was like, okay, there you go. If you're teaching a class about this in a university, this has got to be going on. He goes, yeah, it does. They have these laboratories and they do a lot of stuff that maybe once upon a time we thought of as sci-fi. Think of the Island of Dr. Moreau kind of deal.
Yes, no, just recently, was it last year where they uncovered that lab with all the beagles?
Yes, that's horrible. That is horrible.
Yes.
That is horrible.
And I'm a dog lover, and I'm seeing that as like, got a little lump in my throat seeing them pictures, but that does happen.
Yes,
and
yes. But we're talking here experimentation in like between, which normally you think, okay, supposedly you can't, genetically certain species cannot reproduce. They're not compatible. Like you can't. All right. Are they doing, it sounded like, okay, what are they doing? Are they trying to hybridize humans with some type of other animal? And it's one of those things that even if they're not successful, that they're actually attempting it. How's that? And I'm sure you heard, this came out like a couple of weeks ago about cloning humans for spare body parts.
yes.
And by the way, I read this story back in the 90s. There used to be a magazine called Omni.
Oh,
I've never forgotten
I
it.
subscribed to that before for a little while. I remember that
Yeah,
one.
and then it went away and I never forgot it. And I remember back reading this in the 90s that they were saying this was around the time that cloning was starting. They had discovered the genome and they were talking about cloning and even come out with movies, including from Schwarzenegger and all that. And they're saying same thing. We could clone a body, take out the part of the brain that gives it identity, only leave parts of the brain for breathing to make the body operate. All right. And basically it would be a body just for spare parts. And I was like, God, that's horrible. Are you telling me that it has no soul? It was a horrible idea. This was back in the 90s. Fast forward 25 years and here we're talking like, yeah, it's like a done deal. Or, you don't have to worry. And of course, this is going to be only available to people who have deep pockets. You don't have to worry now if you need a transplant that your body's going to reject a transplant because this is you. We're taking a liver, a heart, or a lung, or whatever it is that you need from you because it's been basically cloned from you. And I was like, that, and I was like, that's, what do you have? Like a human body that's just like, I don't know. It's like the kind of nightmare scenario. And again, Diego, I know we were supposed to talk about the paranormal, but it kind of bleeds over.
It
Then
does, yes.
it goes into like AI and what's going to happen with all these biomedical, how far are they going to go? Because you always have some scientist that will say, you know what, we got to stop. This is not good. And then there's always the little psychopath in the scientific group that says, we're going to do it just to prove that we can. That kind of deal. So yeah, that sometimes is and the thing is by the time we find out, I say normies, the general public, it's 20 years later or 10 years after the fact.
Yeah, just like when we have technology like a cell phone or things like that, that's already been 20 years old because it's
Oh
been
yeah.
used somewhere else. And I remember a point, I don't know if it was late 90s or early 2000s, where they were doing experiments, I think, on rats or mice. They were growing human ears on their back.
Yeah. Yes, I've seen that. And I
And
was like, oh
it's,
God.
yeah, yeah.
I'm like, I
So
look at that and
we
I'm like,
create,
oh yeah.
yeah, we create
I'm an
our own
animal lover.
monsters.
Oh yeah, yes,
Oh,
we
I
do.
am
We
too.
do. I'm an animal lover and I look at that and I'm thinking, God. And by the way, I'm gonna going back, that story that I told you about that hospital that was at the base, it was like a little hospital and it got replaced in a bigger one. By the way, you know that the staff there reported seeing the ghost of ETs there at that hospital. They would say they
Well,
described something with a
I
big
wouldn't doubt
head,
that.
and I was like, oh my God, we never think of that. The extraterrestrials, the ghosts of extraterrestrials, and they said that they were so easy to describe because the bigger, what they were describing was like what you think of as a gray, which is the big head, you know, the skinny body.
Hmm.
I was like, holy crap, the ETs do have like, and then we start going down that rabbit hole about ETs having souls. We always think we were the only ones with souls. I don't know. It opens up a whole new idea as to really what's out there. You
I
know.
mean, we're talking about, it does open a lot of I'll say options on what it is that's going on. But then again, not you, but we will understand that humans, we've only been around for, what is it, what, 20, 30,000 years, this version of humanity, perhaps. We don't
Well,
even know what was before us.
oh no, of course not. Well, they're finding out. I don't know if you've heard. They're finding out that a lot of stuff is older than they originally thought, as far as ancient
Yes.
civilizations. That these markers that they had put, they're like, no, everything here is much older than what you guys have been talking about. Like forget that theory that those academics. It's like, nope, nope, nope.
Yeah, don't even upset the academics. They don't like to hear
Oh my
other
God,
opinions.
no. Those egos, no, they got this. There's been a lot of, I say that a lot of times history has been suppressed because let's say if an academic says this is what it is, and especially if they come from a reputable university, nobody wants to go against their word because they're the expert. And they say that, as a matter of fact, when you have like a group of these older guys die, is when new innovations come in because everybody's more open to new ideas or new theories. How's that? New
Yes.
theories or new timelines or whatever the case might be. Because, for lack of a better word, their egos get in the way. Plus, a lot of times these programs will run on grants, and you will get a grant money if you were successful or you had a breakthrough or things like that. So, if anybody remember the,
Yeah, I
the
was just
opening
gonna
scene of
say,
Ghostbusters, you remember the,
oh
the the
gosh,
beginning that
the
they all work at the
library.
university, and they need to get money for
Yes.
their program, because otherwise they would and this guy, oh my God, this comedian, he goes, now we're gonna have to work for a living. Like we have to provide results. It was like, oh,
Yeah,
that was like,
yeah, they got thrown out of there and their equipment taken away.
right, right. And they had to,
Something like
then he
that. I
goes, can
remember
you
that
imagine we
part.
have to work in the private sector and have results? Like, yeah, so yeah, that motivates a lot of people, like just to keep it, that's my theory is the right one and we'll keep it that way because I need to keep my grant funds coming this way.
I
Yeah.
understand. They say follow the money, the old
Oh,
term.
yes. What
And
is it? Key bono. Who benefits?
and I'm going to go back to something you said. You're
Sure.
talking about a hospital, and then you're talking about an entity or a spirit of an extraterrestrial.
Yes.
This is the only way I can segue to this question.
Go ahead.
Let's talk about season 1, episode 12 of Haunted Hospitals.
Yes.
How were you approached to be on this show? How did they find you, and what did you talk about?
Well, they were I had this was the same producers for Paranormal Survivor. Okay. So, and it's really funny, Diego, because even back in the early 2000s, I was getting contacted by producers of different shows for cases. This was way back when. And I told them, yeah, but you know what? I can't tell you because these are private homes. And this confidentiality with people. And I can tell you about them, but I cannot. Oh, because they wanted to talk directly to the person that had the problem. I said, look, I can't do that. I can't do that. So even back then, I was getting contacted by a lot of different producers of these different shows. This was the very beginning, 02, 03, 04. Then when I did do Haunted Hospitals, this was the same producers as Paranormal Survivor. That was in the first season of that. And like I said, they would always be contacting me, Marlene, do you know of this or about this type of, this is the way this show is, the angle of this show. Do you have anything or anybody that you know that you could send us? I said, when they contacted me about Haunted Hospitals, I said, well, I got this. You'd let me know if this fits what you're looking for. And it was, and this was an experience I had when I was an investigator. And basically that's how I ended up doing the one for the Haunted Hospital. Which these
And
shows are first produced in Canada and then they release them down here into the United States.
oh, okay. I think what is that one TV station? Is it Haunt TV? Is out of Canada?
Haunt TV, but the originally they Trvl Channel, Destination America, and then Haunt TV. I haven't followed Trvl, but I think they're all now on Haunt TV. They've picked up all the reruns of all the different, especially a lot of those Canadian, even though there's a lot of different ones on there, by the way.
There are. There's so many at this point that sometimes I start thinking about and I'm not talking about you because you've been doing this for a while now, so please don't take offense when I say
Nah,
this,
don't worry
where
about that.
there are so many of these TV shows, so many of these teams on there. You start thinking to yourself, are they doing the right thing? Are they performing these investigations correctly? And two, are they in it for the right reasons?
Oh no, I can tell you they're not. I can tell you they're not. It's entertainment. And I don't blame them. You're supposed to produce within 45 minutes, give or take. Let's say when you put in your advertising, you got to make something entertaining. So, yeah. And that's why sometimes you see these shows, sometimes it's the same places and or they hype up like a moment and it's like, and anybody that's ever done real paranormal research or been there, it's not an on-demand thing. All right. That doesn't mean something's not there, but it's, you, and plus, these teams, they have producers and people that set up everything for them. And then they capture all these moments and then they put them together. And how's this? It's safe to say that they put some sensationalism into the production. How's that? Otherwise, people wouldn't be entertained. They wouldn't. But yeah, as far as the motivation, no, no. And you know what? There's a lot of people that have tried to go into paranormal research or they've joined a group and they think that it's like what they see in the shows. And then when they find out, well, you might have to go on a weekend. You mean I got to give up my weekend? Yep. And sometimes it's really boring because you're there like, you know, nothing happens. Doesn't mean nothing's there, but there's a lot of times um, it's not like they expect things to be popping off just like what they see in the shows, and that doesn't always happen all the time. Sometimes there's stuff that's happened. I'll tell you what. Yes, there's sometimes, but a lot of times stuff doesn't happen. You run into a lot of unusual people. You know, you run into a lot of unusual people that you're like, okay, you know, um, that's another thing. Let me tell you something with paranormal research that you have to be really careful where you're going to, the location, because or what the motivation is, or if you have somebody that because I used to do a lot of as I used to work with a foundation, they used to cover the state of Florida. So I work with a lot of different groups. I was always a freelance investigator. And I would, whatever they asked me to do, usually they would send first out what they call an investigation to see if there was something there. And if they found something there, then they would schedule the other one. So whatever they asked me to do, and they would say, Marlene, can you call these people up and do like a phone interview? And I would do the phone interview and go through certain questions. And it's incredible. People sound very reasonable. And what's the word I'm looking for? Normal. And then you get there and you're like, what? Like one time we went to this house and we had three teams, people coming from three different. So we stayed outside waiting till everybody got there. We didn't want to go in before. And we were waiting, I think, for one more group to get there, a couple of other people. And one of the guys, he goes up and comes back, he goes, you know that there's mannequins dressed and posed in the in the living room, right? I said, what? I said, what did you say? And then for a minute I said, no, well, you know what? Maybe these people are involved in the these fashion design industry or something, or they have a store. Then he comes back because he was bored. He goes, and everything is in black and white. I go, what? What do you mean? He goes, everything is decorated in black and white, and even the mannequins are dressed in black and white. I was like, okay. So sure enough, we went in there. Sure enough, the whole house was everything. I mean, when I mean everything with decorated in black and white, which is fine. It's fine. But they did have these mannequins posed on the sofa, these two women mannequins posed on the sofa with a dress. And, you know, later on, I'm talking to them and I'm like, okay, I'm waiting for them to tell me, oh, we have a store or it's a gag or something. No, they were serious. And I'm talking, you know, these old time, you know, the mannequins, like the hard plastic, you know,
Oh,
mannequins with, and I was like, and I mean, that was a whole, we had that case involved grandma, dead grandma, by the way, communicating with one of the, on the old cell phones that supposedly was disconnected. And yeah, it took off from there. But it was one of those things that sometimes you're like, but you sounded so okay over the phone. And then we saw other things, you know, when we were, you know, one of the questions was, you know, which we asked was, is anybody taking any type of drugs? And by this we mean pharmaceutical, not, you know.
hmm
And she's like, well, me and my husband, we've been taking pills for depression. I said, okay, that's fine. Okay. You know, and they had and I said, how about any other household members? Oh, we have our son who was supposed to be like a teenager, right? He was the one that's getting most of the communications from the grandmother. I said, okay, fine. So we're here walking around and I said somebody, hey, you know, let's take some base temperatures. You do this, you do that. Let's see what we could gather from the beginning, right? One of the times I'm standing there, this was a big house, by the way. Very nice neighborhood, exclusive neighborhood. And I'm looking down the hallway and I see dad pouring himself a big old drink. And I was like, if you're telling me you're on meds for depression and you're taking a big giant drink, it's like, oh, your credibility is just starting to plummet. Okay. Like something here is, and you know what? They were very nice people, by the way, but still, it damaged their credibility a little bit. And a lot of times I want to say, Diego, there's, how's this? There's some type of dysfunction or something going on in the family, and they kind of like put it on the paranormal, you know, or sometimes the
right.
paranormal is aggravating it, right? Sometimes the paranormal is aggravating it. But and I guess my point is that as a paranormal investigator, you're there to investigate the paranormal. I can't be like I don't want to get caught in the middle of a family because that's not your place. You see what I'm saying? you're just there, like, do you have a ghost? What's going on? This is what you need to do, or no, it's not. I've gone into one investigation where the lady's telling me she's getting writing on her mirrors, like on her bathroom mirrors. This is a huge house, and they had these bathrooms with these huge mirrors, and she's telling me, "Oh, I'm getting messages written on my mirrors." Okay. I went in with another guy. He's walking around. He's taking photographs all over the place. And I'm like, okay, you know what? And when you write something with a soap film on glass, that's what it looked like. But I
Hmm.
said, okay. And I can't remember what it was, but it was nothing that I said, okay, well, I said, we're going to come back just because, there's something here. And I was like, well, what do you mean besides that? So she shows me, by the way, I'm going to date myself. This is when you had to develop film. Okay, not the digital. She shows me a picture of herself, a couple of pictures of herself, and she's sitting at her dining room table. And you remember when people would get red eye from when,
Yes.
from the flash bulb thing? So she gives me this picture, and she's like one of these, like looking with the red eyes. And I'm looking at it, I'm like, oh, what am I supposed to see? And I was like, okay, see, look at me. And I was like, okay. She's trying to tell me that she's getting get kind of possessed or something's going on because she's got the red eye in the picture from the flash. And I'm looking at that, I'm like, oh. I said, well, what, did you feel something? And she's like, no, can't you see by looking at my face? And I'm like, those are the moments, those uncomfortable moments where, you know, maybe it's not paranormal or supernatural what's going on, but it's very difficult to tell sometimes some clients. That's why I'm saying you have to be real careful that what's going on is nothing to do with the supernatural because they're not going to welcome it. They're convinced it is. And in this case, this lady's thinking I'm getting possessed or overcome, and that's why I got red eye in a picture. So it's sometimes you have a lot of experiences along that, those lines. But yeah, ask me. I mean, I've got a lot of, how's this? I've gone to famous places, and then I've got a lot of cases where it was residential. Stuff happened and you're not going to see them on the TV. How's that?
Yeah, and especially with those famous places, I would assume they wouldn't want to be known for having a haunted location or communicating with spirits, but leaving names out.
Hmm.
Were you any of these, I'll say celebrities or better known people, once you get to their door, you find out who they were? Saying, let's say you knock on a door,
Hmm.
somebody answers it, and it's like, oh, and I'll use this as an example. Oh, it's Billy Ray Cyrus. I didn't know it was going to be you.
It's like, oh, you know what? I never had that situation. Um, Most of the historical places is the ones that when I say residential, like normal residential versus, you have these historical places that all these people go to, like whether it's a hospital or an asylum or a prison or certain places that are known to be haunted that, that are open to the public. I mean, I've done some of those, and to be honest with you, after a while, I'm not going to say all the time. If anything was ever there, it's gone. It's gone. It's or or if you speak to a docent or guide, if they're willing to talk to you, because a lot of times they're prohibited from doing that. They'll tell you, yeah, if you hear anything, it'll be either when we get here and open up the place or when everybody's gone, in other words, or when we're closing the place down, that we'll hear something like maybe somebody walking around or something. But to go in there, those places are really sometimes super difficult to really get any type of proof, to gather any type of proof. And like I said, and a lot of times, for lack of a better word, if at any time there was anything paranormal going on, it's just dissipated or the spirit got fed up with being asked, what's your name? What happened to you? That kind of deal. Um, and again, this is something else that I've found out through the years. Sometimes when you go to certain places, there's an expectation like, oh, this is the ghost or ghosts. They're supposed to haunt this place. Okay. Now, there's something that are called discarnates. Discarnates are spirits that are not tied to a particular spot. Okay. They're free floaters. What happens is when a team goes in there to do an investigation, it's like the word gets out. There's a bunch of people that are going to try to communicate with dead people. So sometimes you will get discarnates come into the location that have nothing whatsoever to do with that place or with that haunting or that family or whatever. They're just desperate to communicate. And even if you have a psychic, but I gotta tell everybody, when you do this work for a while, you develop a sixth sense to go with it. So they're like, I'm hoping somebody is going to be able to hear, see me. So you get a lot more than people believe. You got a lot of free floaters that come in around investigations wanting to communicate. And before I forget, one of my tip-offs when I knew that I was going to have either one, I was going to get a call for an investigation, or two, it was an intelligent is I used to have my hypnosis office. I used to have it as part of my house, but like in a detached garage. And I hadn't closed it. And the only window I had there was the frosted glass. And this window would look out like to a little passageway that I had that would look out to the backyard of my house. And as a matter of fact, I would put my trash cans there. And I would stay there working sometimes at night. If I was always there and all of a sudden I would start seeing some type of shadow or something going by that frosted glass, of course I would stand up and look, especially if nobody was supposed to be there. And it'd be like, okay. And by the way, the window was high up. It couldn't be a cat, a dog, an animal, Plus, it's on the inside of my property. It's not like a sidewalk where anybody could go walking by. Sure enough, I would see some type of movement, and they're checking you out even before you know that you're going to be called in on a case. Those entities, that's number one, I would say, like within 3 days, maybe the most 4 days, or maybe the next day, I would get an email or a call. Hey, we've got this case. I'd be like, yeah, I knew it. That's number one. Number two, if I already knew about the case, then I would know, okay, there's something there, and whatever it is intelligent because it's checking me out. Anybody that's done this work for a while will tell you that. Yes, they will tell you that. They'll say they come to check you out. That's number two. And as a matter of fact, a lot of times also, they, let's say a family has called in a group, all right? And they'll say, oh, come in next week or next, like a week out. All of a sudden, everything dies down. Everything dies down. To the point that they'll call off. And it's like, oh, everything has calmed down. Or you get the 11th hour, people canceling. And I'd be like, yeah, something's going on here. That they would just at the last minute, and then they would call you, well, can you come back? Okay. And then the second time, and it'd be like, that something there is messing with them. In other words, enough to manipulate them, to want to make them cancel the investigation. I had one time where I had a young lady that she had something going on with her, which was pretty serious. I don't want to say she was out and out possessed or obsessed, but she had some type of demonic oppression going on with her. And she wouldn't leave the room while we were there. She refused to leave the room. And by the way, this girl was a teenage girl. She was not a hefty girl, and she was making holes in the wall. She would lose her. And she would refuse to come. And we were it was just me and another person that went there. Refused to come out and talk to us. Refused to come out and talk to us all the time. And sometimes that's what happens. The most important person in the case, they don't want to speak to you. And that's a good tip off too. They
kind of shut down for some reason?
Well, like she went to her room and she closed the door. And she wouldn't come out. And she would not come out. And her mom said, please come out, come out. Nope, 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 nope. And so in other words, sometimes if it's that kind, I'm not talking here about a haunting of a place. And real quick, believe it or not, what the source of it was, this property was out in kind of like a rural area. Have you ever heard of Crossroads magic, Diego?
I have not.
Okay. There's something about Crossroads. Usually it's a three-way, where a lot of magic, and in some cases dark magic, is performed at Crossways. As a matter of fact, that's why they would put gallows and hang people, because supposedly that way the spirit could not, or the ghost could not follow anybody home because it wouldn't know which way to go. So a lot of magic and dark magic is performed at Crossroads. All right. As a matter of fact, you'll even have stories. As a matter of fact, was it Ben Johnson was a musician that invoked the devil at a crossroads. But anyway, that's another story. So apparently, this property was right at the corner. This street, and it goes like this, was at the corner of a crossroads. And apparently, some type of very dark magic had been done at that crossroads. And it had bled over into the property. All right. And I speak to her mom and I said, what's the history on this house? It wasn't that an old house or anything. She goes, well, I don't know if the family that I bought it from was the original builders. I think they were, but I'm not sure. She goes, it was an older thing. Was it a couple or a lady? Yeah, it was an older couple. They had a son who had mental problems. Not mental as in slow. He had some type of mental illness. Nothing that he was institutionalized for, and she goes, you know what? Now that I come to think about it, he kept saying that because they had this, remember this South Florida, this was tropical. They used to have big stands of banana trees. And he says that he used to always see a man back there standing where the banana trees are, because these were really older banana trees. But I think everybody wrote the guy off because supposedly he was not well. And he didn't want to leave. They didn't want to leave the house. And then finally they moved out, and then the house stood empty. And then they had taken it over. And she says that she had found out about that from the person that sold, the real estate agent that sold the house eventually to them. How apparently, I think this guy was seeing things, but they were thought of as he just wasn't right in the head. And then, that's when and I think that what was there, that's eventually affected her daughter, which was a teenager, which a lot of people that know about poltergeist activity know that a young adolescent, especially females, are usually the catalyst or the nexus for poltergeist activity. But yeah, and he would keep telling his mom, oh yeah, there's a man, I see that man standing over there. And by the way, that thing of seeing things in the yard, spirits in the yard, that's very common. I don't know why. It's almost like they can be out in the yard, but for some reason, something doesn't permit them to come into the house.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Is there some sort of, I want to say, energy or barrier they can't cross over, or is there some sort of other spirit not allowing them in that house?
Well, I've run into both scenarios. One, we had one case. This was in Fort Lauderdale, Margate. This was many years ago. This was the one that I told you that they didn't want the thing to follow them home. They say when we get there, they say, look, we've had this house for like 4 or 5 years. They were moving to North Carolina. We've had this thing where they tell us that the real estate agent tells them this story. Oh, when they move in there, they find angels all over the place. Statues of angels inside, outside, in the yard. They go like, how many angels? It was like too much. And when the family left, they left all this behind, right? So this is what triggered them asking the real estate agent, hey, what's up with the angel thing? The real estate agent tells them, look, the family that was here, they were very Christian, he goes, but I don't know what to tell you. The day that we were supposed to go to the closing, even though I'm Jewish, they made me stand in a prayer circle with them right before they went to the closing, right? And we went to the closing, and of course it was successful. These other people move in. So their haunting was they kept seeing this house had a patio, those big sliding glass doors in the back. Mm-hmm. And they shared the yard, like the neighbors, they didn't have a fence up. So if you wanted to, you could walk from yard to yard, to the backyard, if you wanted to go to the neighbors. And they kept seeing somebody out there, or their window would shake. They also had a bathroom with a window to the back. And apparently what they were all seeing is some young girl, some young lady, or something that looked like that going from yard to yard to yard. Now, we theorized, how's that? That whatever this family had done as far as prayers, because apparently something had been going on originally in the house, got kicked out where it could get in the house. So what she was doing was up and down outside the house. And then, we talked to a couple of the neighbors and they said, yeah, we kind of see something sometimes. Come to find out, that development had been done like around the 1970s, around that time, not too far away from the construction site they had sinkholes. Okay. Then who was it? I can't remember. One of the group did some research, and around the time that they were doing the construction there, they had found a girl's body in one of these sinkholes, like a young woman's body in one of the sinkholes. Okay, and as far as they know, she remained a Jane Doe. They did not know who she was. All right. So without knowing for sure, because sometimes there's just no way of verifying it, we were guessing that that is who they kept seeing walking up and down through the backyards, and especially and that thing of the shaking of the sliding glass doors, like something trying to get in. That I think the family that was there did something. Now this family here, they're leaving out of state, and they were like, we want to make sure this thing doesn't. And we said, look, you're doing all the right things. If anything, call us, and maybe we'll get you in touch with a group over there. We never heard from them again, so I'm gonna assume that they left, and nothing went with them. Nothing went with them. But yeah, there sometimes sometimes you don't get definitive answers as to what it is. What you were asking about, like one other time I went on another investigation, and this was a gentleman who he was, I want to say, was he a merchant marine or something? I don't know. He had a lot of stuff that he had traveled around the world, all over the place. He had a lot of paraphernalia and weird stuff from all, where people pick up this, pick up that.
Mm-hmm.
He had bought this older Florida home, even had the old jalousie windows. And I was working with my dowsing rods, and there was something inside that house. But outside, in the yard, because I did with my dowsing rod, was an older lady who was the owner before he bought it. Okay. And that's the thing about dowsing rods. When you work with dowsing rods, it's very slow because you can only ask like yes or no questions, that kind of deal. Like, and basically, so I'm kind of like condensing this. She was the owner, and she says she would not go inside because she saw the man that was inside the house. And she preferred to be outside in the garden because this was her thing. That, the back house, the backyard had all these fruit trees and all these things. Like, you could tell somebody at one point had done a lot of gardening there. In other words, she stayed out there because she did not want to go inside and deal with the spirit of that man that was inside the house. All right. So yes, sometimes you hear about that where you have ghosts, or where you get one that kind of like manages everybody or kicks them out, or one of them is like, let me stay out of your hair. Like, in other words, they're aware of each other. Everybody that thinks that ghosts all get along together, no. Nah, not really. Not really.
No, I mean, if humans, we can't get along sometimes. I
Sure.
think in the afterlife, probably that same behavior still happens. And with all these investigations that you've done, and has anything followed you back to your place?
One time I learned, it was when you're doing this for a long time, people come and go, and you're still around. So I learned early on to take a smudge stick and smudge my car. I would open the trunk, and let me explain why. One time, usually, like I said, sometimes people would arrive from different points, so they would leave in a car. So we would say, hey, we're not going to sit here in front of somebody's house and have like a little meeting. There's a BK or there's a gas station down the street. Let's meet there, and we'll just do like a brief, debrief before we put out our reports, whatever. So one time we're there, and there's one lady, I'll never forget, she had a Saturn. You remember the old Saturns?
Yes.
And this was also the time of the Beanie Babies. And she had a million Beanie Babies and crap. So we're sitting there, we parked the cars, and everybody's just sitting there like, what did you think? Blah, 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 BS, BS, BS. And all of a sudden, we hear something thumping around in the trunk of her car. And everybody looks at one another like, this is not like something. First of all, the cars are turned off. Everybody's parked. We're just talking. And we look at her like, and she's looking at us, and we're like, what? I mean, it looked, for lack of a better word, it sounded like something was alive in there. Not like something fell off. It was boom, 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 like that. And we looked at her and we're like, it's your car. You're going to have to open it. We're not going to open it. We're not going to open the trunk, man. It's got to be you. So she's looking at us like, okay. So she's like, you can tell she's coming to open that trunk like, oh my God. She opens the trunk, nothing's there. I think she had, some stuff, the trunk. We're like, okay. Yeah, everybody's behind her like ready to like, yeah, great ghost hunters, man. We're ready to like, so then she's like, okay. Then I think she went to the front of her car or something, and she comes back and she goes, "You're not gonna believe." She had all these Beanie Babies and crap all over her dashboard, and she goes, "Man, a bunch of my Beanie Babies were thrown off the dashboard." And we're like, "What?" And it was like, I mean, it really sounds innocuous, but it shows you that stuff can follow you. And we all were like looking at each other like, "Okay, this is going on." That's when I learned I would smudge it. I've had other paranormal investigators tell me, "Hey, Marlene, I know somebody's hanging out. Somebody's hanging out with me. I could tell. Somebody's like, they're shadowing me." And we learned early on, you don't engage with it. It'll go away. Unless your aura's thinned out or you're stressed out big time about something and your aura's thin, if you ignore it and don't engage, like don't start like, "What's your name? Why are you here?" Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do that. You know, no, it'll go away. It'll go away because if you engage with it, you know, then it's like, that's the invite. That's all that it needs. It might have been a free floater. You might remind the spirit of his sister, his brother, his whatever, his buddy, the friend, his mother. No, don't engage. And eventually, after 2, 3, 4 days, it just goes away. But again, you have a lot of people that make that mistake. And also that thing about, and I'm sure you've heard about it, people that think, oh, it's a little kid. It's like, oh, that's a big problem. I'm sorry. Whenever, to me, if we ever got a case where there was supposed to be a little kid, I was very extremely cautious. I would say 80% of the time, not 100, but 80% of the time, it was not a kid. It was not a kid. It was something else. And usually dark that was manipulating the humans by making it think it was a kid. That's why you have to be really careful. And most people, they're thinking, it's a kid. How could it be? Poor kid. Maybe he's lost or she's lost. And it's like, I understand, but chances are whatever it is wants you to engage with it, wants you to talk to it before you realize exactly who it is you're dealing with or what you're dealing with. How's that?
Wow, it's kind of like you're talking about they're setting a trap. Now, is that one of those things where in your book, Paranormal Safety, did you put any tips related to something like that?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, I said number one is to take ownership of your house. Like, don't think, oh my God, I'm so helpless. That, and, that even if, let's say, you have a paranormal team and they come and they do something, or even if you have a priest come in and bless it, or whatever it is, or a minister that comes, whatever, you need to keep, number one, you got to stay away from the paranormal. Sorry, you cannot engage in this field anymore. Because even if you get rid of it, I tell everybody, you know that you're earmarked. All right? So you can't dabble in the paranormal anymore, even if it fascinates you. Don't do that. That's number one. Number two, you got to keep doing whatever it is, prayers, smudging, holy water, whatever. I'm talking across the board, whatever your spiritual beliefs are. You got to reclaim the space of where you live. This is your place. You are the one that is supposed to be there, not the spirit. Once you give it mentally that dominion over you, you have a problem. All right. One of the times, I don't know if I had mentioned it to you, Diego, like one time I was listening. His name is difficult to pronounce, Father Rippinger or Rippensberger or something like that. And by the way, I like him because he gives practical advice about things of this nature. He is a Catholic priest, and he says that you can go ahead if you have a property and you can buy those salt licks that they sell for deers.
Mm-hmm.
Go get them blessed and bury them in the four corners of your property to keep evil out. Salt. All these things are known, as that are laying down barriers. I've had scenarios where people have said, well, about cleansing the house. And they've cleansed their house or they've put down barriers with salt, whether it's at the entryways or the windows or at the corners. And then it's really funny because then they'll have certain friends and or families that don't want to come visit anymore. Why do you think that is?
Because they got something attached there. Don't want to be in the
Bing,
house. Yep.
bingo. Yep, that's exactly what it is. That person will then say, well, instead of coming to the house, why don't we go and meet at the so and so and have dinner there? Or somebody that, let's say, was telling you, I'm going to spend the day with you, and all of a sudden, like 30 minutes later, they're like, they got to go or they got to leave. I said, and by the way, by this, I don't mean this person is a bad person. They might have something with them that they themselves don't know that, or that they haven't told you. It's not like they're like, oh, this is a bad person. Sometimes it is, but other times there's just something walking with them that is, get out of here, get out of here. So people don't realize that when they do these cleansings and they put these barriers down, certain people might not want to come to your house or will leave very quickly after they arrive. And this is really funny because I've had people where they've been having work done on their property, like maybe construction or remodel or something, and they've done it, and then they have a problem with their workmen coming back. And it's like, yeah, you should have done that after the work was finished. People don't realize that works across the board. That when you put these barriers down, it's not like, oh, by the way, but you don't, these people that, let's say, come and work on your property, you have no idea what's going on in their lives or what they do or what they dabble in or what's going on. All they do is show up and work for you or work for a company that you hired. And when you lay this down, that's it. It's like kryptonite, but you have to, that's one of those aspects that you really know that it's working because of that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess that's one of those things we could advise if you have an issue in your home. If you want to keep these things out, take your advice and do what you said with the salt. Now, for the listeners of Let's Find Out, let's go step by step.
Okay.
When they want to learn more about your books, and I know you have one coming out, you're still writing it.
That's a fiction book. I do supernatural thrillers. As a matter of fact, it's a tie into Dracula. It's a vampire, and everybody's like, "Oh my God, another vampire book!" Nah, I'm doing a. You know how people take a character and they do an alternate version of the story. I'm jumping off from Dracula and I'm basing it on. If anybody read, and by the way, I'm going back to the original Bram Stoker Dracula. I'm not talking about the different versions, like Twilight or the vampire that drives around the Volvo. None of that. I'm going back to there was one of the guys, Morris, was killed when they went to Transylvania to the Carpathian Mountains to destroy Dracula. This is 30 years after this happened, which was supposedly 1897, and this takes off from the Morris family, and that's all I'm going to say. So it has a Dracula tie-in, but not what people think. And it's a Chronicles. I've already written 3 books in this called the Sybil Chronicles. That's fiction. I also have nonfiction books, which has to do. First of all, you could go to Amazon and you can find if you go to Marlene Pardo Pellicer, you'll find my author book, that or on Goodreads. Okay, or you go to my website, mppellicer.com, MiamiGhostChronicles.com. You'll find links there to the books, also to the audio, video versions of all the shows, whether it's Stories of the Supernatural or Nightshade Diary or Supernatural Storytime, and also my articles. And if you really want to stay on top of it, you can sign up for my newsletter on Substack, which I do a lot of articles there. Honestly, I don't write for any. I write for myself, my own publications. Every once in a while, I have gotten contacted to ask for permission to reprint my articles, but I don't write for any publication per se, except my own. And then I have Eerie News, which I read all the interesting, weird stuff out there. God knows, there's always some weird stuff going all the time. What am I talking about? All the time, there's weird stuff going on in the world.
Absolutely true. It's 24/7 cycle. It doesn't stop. And now we're talking about your podcast and Supernatural Storytime. What do you have coming up in the next few weeks?
Let's see. Well, besides working on my book for release it and I'll announce it, I have a lot of interest. I'm starting season 18 of Stories of the Supernatural. The show is 8 years old. So as a matter of fact, season 18 covers from July to December of 2025. And then before you know it, I'll be going into 2026 because, as you know, Diego, production always goes way into the future,
Yes.
you know. So, hey, by the way, if anybody wants, contact me. You've got stories, you're an author, you're weird, you've got unexplained stuff. In other words, whether you're an author, an expert, a scientist, or just somebody that's had weird, contact me, Marlene at MiamiGhostChronicles.com for an interview. I believe me, I'm not a snob when it comes to that. I'm willing to listen. The best stories I've ever heard have been from people that go, "Don't tell anybody, but you know what happened?" I was like, "Really? What happened?" Because you get confided in a lot when people think that you're not going to be like, "You're crazy," or like, "Oh." So yes, so of course, contact me, and maybe I can set you up for an interview. But yes, I'm booking guests right now. That's what my point is for season 18 of Stories of the Supernatural.
Excellent. And it's, you mentioned it. It's interesting how when people finally get comfortable with you and they find out what it is that you do, like if you're writing a books about supernatural, paranormal, or have a podcast, especially at work, I've noticed that they're a little standoffish sometimes. And then when they catch you by themselves, hey, when I was at this
Yeah,
age or this happened, it's kind of really cool because then you get to listen to their story. And then,
yes,
I always love talking to somebody about their experiences and giving them my opinions. But I say, ultimately it's up to you what you think it happened. But, but thank you for
right,
sharing.
right.
So, Marlene, it's been a pleasure having you on the
No,
show.
on the
And
contrary.
oh my goodness, I love everything that you're doing. I listen to your stuff at
You have to
work.
come back and be my guest because you've got a lot of interesting stories, especially if you're working on book number two, you know. Let me ask you, what is book number two
Yes.
going to be about? The cryptids, right?
Yeah. So what I'm doing, a gathering, uh, not much of a collection. So with cryptids,
Mm-hmm.
no, I've never had a actual cryptid experience. Now, something similar, and maybe I'll talk about that on your show. I don't even know if I
Mm-hmm.
mentioned that,
Sure.
but it's different chapters about mostly lesser known cryptids because Bigfoot
Yes.
always gets to shine, Mothman,
Mm-hmm.
Loch Ness. So you're looking at like the Mount Rushmore cryptids, but there's so many other ones that I just learned about that I'll say I never heard. And then so I'm gathering these stories, different centuries. I'm talking about or writing about cryptids in the United States because I it's easier for me to do because I can't really
Mm-hmm.
tell you about a cryptid in Germany or Russia when I don't even know the
Right.
history that well. So
Right.
it'll be mostly about American cryptids. So more of the like the lesser known, of course. And
Right, right, right. And that's the thing, like you said, Loch Ness, Bigfoot. They're the ones like how's this? They're like the universally known ones. As far as cryptids are known, like you'd say it and everybody goes, "Oh yeah, Sasquatch." Um, but you know what? There's a lot of different things that are seen, like especially like let's say like the Loch Ness, but there's a lot of lakes here that have, in the United States and in Canada, I'm going to say North America, that have their own versions of a Loch Ness monster. And I'm not gonna rain on your parade. That not only do they stay in the water or have been seen like coming out, like they're mostly aquatic, like an amphibian, like they'll be in the water, but they've been seen on land around the lake shore. I mean, and there's a lot of cryptids out there, like you said, that people are just not familiar with.
yeah, so you almost hit the nail on the head on some of them. So I'll definitely tell you
Yes,
about some of the ones that rediscovered because I didn't discover anything, but I rediscovered these stories because I think
yes,
these stories, like whether it's folklore or traditions, are very important to keep those things alive because that's the history of our people, that's the history of our country, and I think it's
yes,
it's important to keep these things alive.
sure, yes.
And
Whether it was a real thing or whatever, or folklore, I think folklore is very important. Yeah, it's part of history.
it is, and a lot of those are cautionary tales,
Oh yeah.
and sometimes you got to really pay attention because they're trying to tell you something without telling you something, and
Yeah, like don't go to that dark mountain that's everybody said don't go there because people disappear. I'm only kidding. You know what? And I would love to discuss it when you think of cryptids, and then you think about all these people that supposedly disappear at all these national parks. It's like, are we talking, is one thing totally separate from the other, or is one cause the causation? You know, because everybody's got their version of what causes it. ET's taking you, Bigfoot's taking you, people are stupid and fall off the edge of a cliff, you know, that kind of thing. Or cryptids. It could be some unknown cryptid out there.
Yes, and I'll give you a couple teasers. Be on the lookout for a story by the Ozark Howler and the Vegetable Man. Yeah, the Vegetable Man.
Oh my God!
Yeah.
We got to talk about that.
That's West Virginia. I love living here. And
that's right. That's your neck of the woods. Yes.
Yes, ma'am. I'm out here in the mountains, and I love it here. This is great. We're having Miami weather right now. It's hot.
No, let me tell you something. It is. Today we were commenting. It's like, man, it's only May. What's going on here?
So I got plenty of sunscreen, my friend. But
yeah.
But hey, thank you for being on the show. And
on the contrary.
And once that book comes out, please come back. I'd love to talk about it. And I'd like to talk more about your investigations and your personal experiences.
Absolutely. You got it. Good luck to you. Take care. It was wonderful.
Thank you, my friend.
Let's find out with Diego, the power of Diego Mania.
Copyright Diego the Podcaster. All content for Let's Find Out is the property of Diego the Podcaster and is served directly from our servers with no modification, redirects, or rehosting. All celebrity impersonators are paid performers. The impersonated celebrities do not endorse or promote any views or opinions expressed by our guests, Diego the Podcaster, or Let's Find Out. The information shared on Let's Find Out with Diego is provided on an as-is basis, with no guarantees of completeness, accuracy, usefulness, or timeliness.